I smell you hobbits as you come back to Pocket Ronnie.
Okay, today we're going to be doing distributive property. Distribute means to multiply to everything in the parentheses. When you see a number in front of the parentheses, remember parentheses implies multiplication. Like if I saw 5 times 4, that implies multiplication. So this implies 5 times everything that's in that parentheses. So think about if these were a bunch of kids in the parentheses and they were each getting 5 cookies, you want to distribute the 5 cookies to each of these kids that are in that parentheses. So 5 gets multiplied to everything in the parentheses because 5 is getting distributed. It's getting handed out or multiplied to each one of these things. So we do 5 times 3a. If you want to write it like this, 5 times 3a times 5 times a negative 9. So this is like 5 times negative 9. And then 5 times a positive 2a. Okay, Matthew C might stop here, but I recommend to keep going on and keep simplifying. So 5 times 3a is 15a. 5 times a negative 9, a positive 5 times a negative 9 is a negative 45. And then a 5 times 2a is 10a. Now you can combine like terms. You can combine 15a, you can combine a's to a's. 15a plus 10a, 25a, and then there's nothing to combine your negative 45. So Matthew C might not have this as a final answer, but I recommend simplifying it all the way down to this. Okay, that was 4D2. So you can think of it as, you can even go to this step. 5 times 3a, numbers to numbers, letters to letters. 5 times 3, 15a. 5 times a negative 9, negative 45. 5 times a positive 2a, because 5 times 2 is 10a. So most of the times I will just jump to this step right here. Alright, looking at 4D, number 4, you have a negative out in front of your parentheses. So you have this negative. Well, there is a number implied here that we don't write. That is a 1. A negative 1. So this is a negative 1 times everything. So you multiply your negative 1 to each term. So negative 1 times a negative a. A negative times a negative is a positive. 1 times a is just 1a. Negative times negative b. This is like a negative 1 in there. Negative 1. That was like a negative 1 too. So negative 1 times negative 1b. A negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1. And then b. Numbers to numbers, letters to letters. And you don't, well, negative 1 times a positive 2c. Negative 1 times a positive 2 is a negative 2. And then you just have your c. And you don't have to write your ones there. So you just have a plus b minus 2c. You can't combine a's to b's or b's to c's or a's to c's. And so that is your final answer. Okay, looking at 4E3. Okay, you have a negative x in front of your parentheses. This implies you want to multiply this negative x to everything in the parentheses. Negative x times that, a negative x times that, a negative x times that. So this means a negative x times y. Well, a negative times a positive, you know you're going to have a negative. And then letters times letters, x times y, you just write that as x, y. That implies x times y. Now we do negative x times a positive 2. Well, a negative times a positive is a negative. X times 2 is just 2x. Write your numbers first and then your letters. So 2x implies 2 times x. Negative x times m, a positive m. Well, a negative times a positive is a negative. X times m, we just write that as mx. In algebra, it's usually best if you can write your letters alphabetically. So m is written before x. xm is not wrong because m times x is the same thing as x times m. That is the commutative property. And we cannot combine any of these terms because they are not exactly alike. And so this would be your final answer. Look at 4E2, a squared times 3 plus b. Okay, again, this a squared is out in front of the parentheses, so that implies distribution. We need to distribute the a squared to everything, meaning we need to multiply the a squared to everything in that parentheses. A squared times 3. Don't get thrown off by this a squared. A squared is just like having an x. So a squared times 3 is just 3a squared. Put your number out in front. Your coefficients go in front of your letters. 3a squared implies 3 times a squared. Now multiply your a squared times b. It's a positive. A positive times a positive is a positive. A squared times b would just be a squared b. Write them in alphabetical order. A squared b implies a squared times b, and that's how you would write it. Okay, I'm going to show another example that's not in the book. This is a times a plus b. The fact that this a is out in front of the parentheses means multiplication, and you had to distribute it. This has to get distributed to everything in the parentheses. A times a. Well, let me show you with numbers. What is 5 times 5? And I don't mean 25. You can rewrite 5 times 5 as 5 squared. Anything times itself is itself squared. So a times a is a squared. A times a is not 2a. Okay? A times a is a squared. A times a is not 2a. A plus a is 2a. A times a is not 2a. So a times a is a squared, and then a positive a times a positive b is a positive. A times b is a b. A positive a times a positive b is a positive ab. AB implies a times b. And that's how you would write that.